The song that would go on to dominate the charts, receive countless accolades, and shape the musical landscape of its time, had an origin shrouded in mystery. For millions of fans around the world, it was just another piece of music that spoke to their hearts. But for a select few, the true origins of this iconic track raised unsettling questions. Was it an accidental moment of brilliance or something more calculated? Was the song born from pure creativity, or was it, in fact, the product of a much more shadowy process? The haunting melody of the song quickly became unforgettable, the kind of tune that echoed in your mind long after you heard it. The lyrics, tender and poetic, resonated deeply with listeners. It became an anthem for a generation, its popularity reaching an apex that many artists could only dream of. But within the world of music, behind the glimmering success and public adoration, a darker story was brewing. It all started with an idea, or rather, an idea borrowed. You see, there had been whispers in the music community that this song shared eerie similarities to an older, lesser-known track, one that had all but faded into obscurity. The comparison, at first, seemed frivolous, a mere coincidence that could be easily brushed aside. But the more experts examined the two songs, the more the parallels became apparent. The chord progression, the arrangement, and even the emotional weight of the lyrics seemed almost too similar. The artist behind the smash hit, someone who had quickly risen to stardom, claimed that it was all original. But in the world of music, originality is often subjective. Was it possible that the artist had been influenced by the older song, either consciously or subconsciously? Or did the artist know exactly what they were doing, pulling elements from a song that had been long forgotten by most? Fans and critics alike began to wonder, was this a case of homage or was it theft? The public, caught up in the euphoria of the song's success, initially paid little attention to the rumblings of plagiarism. But as the comparisons grew harder to ignore, the question of whether the artist had stolen from the past or simply recycled the past became inescapable. At the heart of this mystery was a burning question. Was this song truly an original creation? Or had it been pieced together from something long buried in the past? The song became more than just a chart-topping hit. It became a symbol of how far an artist might go to succeed. What could this mean for the way we look at the music industry? The two musicians at the heart of this story were anything but strangers. They were both giants in their field, yet they were polar opposites in terms of personality and approach. One was an up-and-coming star, eager to make his mark in the world of music, while the other had already cemented his legacy, his influence stretching far beyond his immediate circle. The younger artist was hungry for success, willing to do whatever it took to climb the ladder. The elder, seasoned by years of experience, had mastered the art of writing hits, but was often criticized for being complacent, a figure content to rest on his laurels. When their paths first crossed, it was almost inevitable that there would be tension. Each musician represented something the other either aspired to or resented. The young artist, full of ambition and fresh ideas, saw in his older counterpart a wealth of knowledge and experience, but also a deeply ingrained resistance to change. On the other hand, the elder musician, though respectful of the younger's raw talent, felt threatened by the new wave of creativity that was challenging the traditional boundaries of music. It was a clash of egos, a collision of worlds that would eventually lead to a confrontation no one could have predicted. Behind the scenes, the younger artist's creativity was beginning to flourish, and with that came a growing pressure to produce something groundbreaking, something that would push him into the upper echelons of the music world. But with that pressure came a temptation to take shortcuts. He had heard rumors of the older musician's uncompleted, unfinished tracks, unreleased songs that were only spoken of in hushed tones. These unfinished pieces of music were said to contain ideas so pure, so musically ahead of their time, that they were considered sacred within the industry. The younger artist's curiosity was piqued, and more than that, his desperation to make it big was beginning to cloud his judgment. This moment of temptation, this moment of crossing a moral boundary, happened almost by chance. A shared studio session led to an impromptu exchange of ideas, but what happened next remains a mystery. Some believe the younger artist was influenced in ways he didn't even understand, while others argue that he deliberately took advantage of the older musician's unfinished work. Perhaps it was a case of being in the right place at the right time, or perhaps, deep down, the young artist saw an opportunity he couldn't resist. The question that lingers is this: did the younger artist steal from the older one out of pure ambition, or was this merely a case of two creative minds converging, with one unknowingly inspiring the other? It's impossible to say for sure, but one thing is clear: something changed in that moment. A shift in the balance of power, a spark that ignited what would later become one of the most talked about controversies in the music world. It wasn't long before the accusations began to surface. At first, the whispers were subtle, just a few offhand remarks in the music industry about how the new hit song sounded eerily familiar to an older, forgotten track. But as time passed, the comparisons became impossible to ignore. Fans started noticing the similarities. Critics began writing reviews that drew direct connections between the two songs, and soon enough, the rumor mill exploded. What had once been seen as a coincidence was now being labeled as something much darker. The older track, hidden away in the annals of music history, had never been a mainstream success. It was one of those rare gems that only the most dedicated music enthusiasts remembered. But those who had heard it knew something, something that others didn't. The chord progression, the rhythm, and the tone of the song were all strikingly similar to the younger artist's new hit. It wasn't just a casual resemblance. The structure of the melody, the lyrical flow, even the underlying themes of both songs were almost identical. To the trained ear, it was clear. The younger artist's song was not as original as the public had been led to believe. The allegations of plagiarism were officially made by a few music insiders, and soon the media took notice. With the song still riding high on the charts and the artist's fame at its peak, the accusations couldn't have come at a worse time. The public was split. Some believed the similarities were purely coincidental, a result of the two artists drawing from the same well of influence. After all, music has always been a melting pot of ideas, and it's not unusual for multiple artists to create something that sounds similar. But others, including some prominent critics, felt that the younger artist had crossed a line. They argued that it wasn't just a case of being inspired by another song, it was a clear case of artistic theft. The older track, though obscure, had been there first, and now it was being repurposed for mainstream success. The younger artist's song had become a global phenomenon, earning millions in record sales and streams. Meanwhile, the original song remained largely forgotten, its artist still struggling to gain recognition. In the midst of the controversy, the younger artist defended himself vehemently, claiming that any similarities were purely coincidental. He insisted that his song was an original work, born from his own creativity. But even as he made his case, the doubt lingered. Had he been inspired by the older track, or had he consciously taken from it? The debate raged on, but one thing was certain: the allegations had changed everything. What had once been a celebrated hit was now tainted with suspicion. Fans, critics, and the music industry at large were left wondering if they had been duped. Had they been listening to an original work of genius? Or had they unknowingly embraced a theft disguised as artistry? As the allegations of theft escalated, the story shifted from rumor to full-blown legal drama. It wasn't just the music industry that was involved anymore. It was the courts, the lawyers, and the very machinery of justice. The battle over who owned the rights to the song's creative essence would become a landmark case in the world of music copyright law. The older artist, whose song had been overshadowed by the younger artist's meteoric rise, filed a lawsuit claiming that his original work had been plagiarized. The case quickly gained national attention. It wasn't just about one song. It became about the very concept of artistic integrity, ownership, and the blurred lines between inspiration and theft. The courtrooms were filled with heated debates on what constitutes true originality in music. Can an artist claim something as their own if they were heavily influenced by another's work? Where do you draw the line between tribute and imitation? As the legal proceedings unfolded, the younger artist's defense became clear. He argued that while his song shared similarities with the older track, it was still a product of his own creative process. He emphasized that art has always been influenced by what came before it, pointing out the countless examples of artists borrowing from one another throughout history. In his mind, this wasn't theft, it was evolution, a continuation of the creative cycle that's as old as music itself. He went as far as to claim that he had never even heard the original song before writing his own, further asserting that any similarities were purely coincidental. But the evidence against him was mounting. Music experts were brought in to analyze both tracks. They pored over the chords, the melodies, the lyrics, and the overall structure of the songs. The conclusions were damning. The two songs were almost identical in structure and tone. The similarities went beyond coincidence. There were distinct patterns that could not be easily explained away. In the court of public opinion, the fallout was immediate. Fans of the younger artist were divided. Some remained loyal, believing the accusations to be baseless, a smear campaign against a beloved artist. Others felt betrayed, wondering if the song they had come to love was merely a copy of something that had been hidden away for years. Meanwhile, the older artist's reputation was bolstered by the legal victory, but the emotional toll was significant. The victory in court didn't erase the years of struggle he had endured to get to that point. His song, once lost to obscurity, had now gained newfound attention, but not the kind he had hoped for. It was clear that the legal victory was bittersweet. His success didn't come from the validation of his artistry. It came from a courtroom ruling. As for the younger artist, his career remained intact for the most part, though the shadow of the controversy lingered over his future work. The accusations would never fully go away, and the song, once a beloved anthem, would forever be associated with the theft controversy. The question remained, could a song, no matter how popular, ever truly be the same once its integrity was called into question? While the legal drama raged on, something deeper was at play, a cultural force, an unseen influence that might explain the striking similarities between the two songs. As the accusations of theft were being hurled back and forth, few stopped to consider the broader context in which both songs were created. What if this wasn't just a simple case of plagiarism, but a reflection of the artistic currents flowing through the music world at the time? The music industry, especially during the time the younger artist wrote his song, was in the midst of a massive cultural shift. With the advent of digital music production, artists had more access than ever to past works, obscure tracks, and rare musical influences. The boundaries between genres began to blur, and the lines between inspiration and imitation became more difficult to define. It was an era of remix culture where sampling was seen as an acceptable part of the creative process, and musicians often pulled from a broad spectrum of influences to craft their own sound. The older track, though largely forgotten, had been part of this melting pot of influences. It wasn't a widely known hit, but for those who had heard it, it represented a unique style, a blend of folk, rock, and experimental sounds that resonated deeply with a small group of dedicated listeners. For the younger artist, this song had been part of the backdrop of his own creative development. It's possible that, consciously or unconsciously, he had absorbed elements of it, along with a myriad of other sounds, into his own work. There's a case to be made that this kind of influence is inevitable in any period of artistic innovation. Every artist is shaped by what they listen to, what they experience, and what they encounter in their environment. Could the similarities between the songs have been part of a broader artistic movement, one that transcended individual intent? After all, how many songs across the history of music have had similar chord progressions, themes, or musical motifs? The overlap may not have been intentional, but part of a greater wave of musical expression that shaped the times. This idea of unseen influences raises an interesting question. In an era where sampling, remixing, and genre fusion are commonplace, should we even be surprised when two artists create works that bear striking resemblances? If two creators are drawing from the same cultural pool, sharing the same influences, it's almost impossible to avoid overlap. Does that make it theft, or does it simply make it the nature of creative evolution? It's a difficult question, and one that doesn't have a simple answer. But the truth is that while the older artist's track may have been a direct inspiration for the younger artist, it was likely just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. This was not just a case of borrowing, it was a reflection of how music evolves over time, how each song builds upon what came before. As the storm of accusations raged, the younger artist's voice in the narrative became more urgent, desperate even. While the legal system, critics, and fans focused on the allegations, the artist himself continued to defend his work, steadfast in his belief that no theft had occurred. His side of the story, often overlooked in the frenzy of media attention, presented a different perspective on the situation, one that raised more than a few eyebrows. The younger artist's defense was simple, though perhaps not as easily accepted by the public. He had never consciously stolen anything. His song, in his view, was a natural outgrowth of his own creative process. He argued that influences are an inherent part of music making. Every artist is shaped by the works they admire, and this was no different. The track that had caused the uproar was simply the result of a long-standing admiration for the genres and sounds of the past, including that of the older artist, whose work had quietly existed in the background of the musical landscape for years. But what if the similarities were purely coincidental? After all, music is built on patterns and repetition. How often have we heard songs that share similar chord progressions, melodies, or even lyrical themes? Was this truly theft, or was it merely an example of the blurred lines between what is original and what is influenced by the world around us? For the younger artist, this was an important distinction. He didn't see his actions as malicious, nor did he believe that his success was built on someone else's broken dreams. Rather, he viewed it as the evolution of sound, a continuum of musical influence that was inevitable in a world where genres and styles often overlap. In his defense, he presented the idea that artistic borrowing is not the same as theft. It's a form of tribute, a nod to those who came before, rather than a calculated attempt to capitalize on another's work. He pointed to the countless examples in music history of artists sampling or covering songs, sometimes directly and sometimes more subtly. In his mind, the line between inspiration and imitation was much finer than the public wanted to admit. The song, after all, was a creation of his own. The melodies, the lyrics, the performance. No one could say that he hadn't added his own unique twist to it. But even with his defense, there remained a fundamental question. How much of his success could truly be attributed to his originality, and how much was the result of tapping into the collective cultural consciousness? For some, the artist's arguments felt like an attempt to escape the weight of his own actions, an effort to deflect responsibility. For others, his words struck a chord. What if the entire music industry, at its core, was based on this very idea of borrowing, of taking something old and making it new again? In the end, the younger artist's perspective was one that would always be subject to debate. Was it plagiarism, or was it simply part of the natural process of creating something new? While the world may never know the full truth, the complexity of his defense added a layer of nuance to an otherwise straightforward accusation. His story forced the audience to reconsider their assumptions about what it means to steal in the world of music. As the legal battles subsided and the public's focus shifted, the song's legacy became a topic of continued debate. What had once been a song of pure joy and universal connection had now become tainted, forever marked by the controversy of its creation. The song, once considered an anthem of its generation, had evolved in the eyes of the public. It was no longer just a track on the radio. It was the embodiment of a larger cultural and legal struggle. In the years following the legal drama, the song's meaning began to shift. Fans who had once adored it without question now found themselves divided. For some, the accusations of theft overshadowed the song's emotional power. What had once been a piece of art they could lose themselves in became a symbol of betrayal, a reminder that what they had loved might not have been as pure as they had believed. The magic that the song had once held began to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of its origins. Yet, for others, the song remained unchanged. They refused to let the controversy dictate their experience of the music. To them, the song represented something timeless, a piece of art that transcended its creator's actions. It had spoken to them on a deeply personal level, and no amount of legal wrangling or public outcry could take that away. For these fans, the song was a reflection of their own lives, their own experiences, and no controversy could erase that connection. However, the controversy did cast a long shadow over the younger artist's career. Though he continued to produce music and tour, the question of whether he had truly created something original followed him. Some fans held on to their belief in his artistry, but many others could never fully shake the image of him as a thief, someone who had taken from another artist rather than building something from the ground up. No matter how many hits he would go on to write, no matter how many fans he would win over, the whispers of plagiarism would always linger in the background. The older artist's legacy, too, was transformed. His forgotten song, once overlooked and underappreciated, became a symbol of lost potential. It found new life as the controversy surrounding the younger artist's success brought it back into the spotlight. Ironically, the older artist became a figure of redemption for many, a symbol of integrity and authenticity in a world where the line between originality and imitation was becoming increasingly difficult to define. But despite all the noise, the true legacy of the song may lie somewhere in between. It serves as a reminder of how fragile artistic ownership can be, how quickly public perception can shift, and how the music industry itself is often built on layers of influence, collaboration, and sometimes even theft. In the end, the question remained, did the theft actually happen? The court had ruled, the critics had weighed in, and the public had chosen sides. But the deeper mystery of the song's origins and the true nature of the younger artist's intentions remained unresolved. The controversy may have been legally settled, but it left a lingering unease, one that couldn't be wiped away by a court ruling or a public statement. The unresolved tension between creativity and ownership would forever haunt the legacy of this song. There was no definitive answer, no moment of clarity that would tie up all the loose ends. The song had sparked a conversation that was far bigger than the song itself. It had forced the world to reconsider how we define originality in an age where influence is inevitable and collaboration is often taken for granted. Was the younger artist a victim of the cultural tide that swept him up, or was he a deliberate thief? Was the older artist a victim of circumstance, or was he simply overlooked in the vast machinery of the music industry? Some argued that the younger artist had indeed stolen, whether consciously or not. The similarities were too striking to ignore, and the case for plagiarism seemed solid. For them, the debate wasn't about whether the song was good, it was about the integrity of the artist behind it. The legal verdict had resolved the matter in court, but it hadn't resolved the moral implications. Could a work of art be truly appreciated if it had been taken, even unintentionally, from someone else? Yet others contended that the entire controversy had been blown out of proportion. In a world where artists borrow, sample, and remix, why should this instance be any different? The line between homage and theft, they argued, was more blurred than ever. The younger artist had certainly been influenced by the older track, but influence was a natural part of the creative process. Was it really right to crucify someone for drawing from the same cultural well that everyone else was drinking from? After all, the younger artist had taken the music and made it his own. adding his own voice, his own interpretation. Wasn't that what art was all about? But as time passed, it became clear that neither side would ever fully convince the other. The fans who believed in the younger artist would continue to stand by him no matter what. The critics who believed he was a thief would never accept his defense. And in the middle of it all, the song itself remained. A cultural touchstone that had outlasted its own creation. In the end, the unresolved mystery only added to its mystique. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the song was that it forced people to confront their ideas of ownership and influence. In a world where every idea seems to be built on the backs of those who came before, where does one artist's vision end and another's begin? The song's true origins, much like the controversy itself, will likely never be fully understood. But in its ambiguity, it continues to resonate, forever a symbol of the fine line between creation and appropriation.